How you doing, everybody? Today we are taking a quick look at Gladiator II. This is the long-awaited sequel to Ridley Scott's Gladiator, and once again finds Scott in the director's chair, and stars Paul Mescal, Pedro Pascal, and Denzel Washington. Mescal plays a man who goes by the name Hanno, but is actually a now grown-up Lucius Verus in hiding. He was sent away as a child by his mother Lucilla, once again played by Connie Nielsen, fearing that as the heir to the throne of the Roman Empire, he would be a target, and she was right. He ultimately ends up in Numidia, and he marries a woman whose name doesn't really matter because she gets killed almost immediately when the Romans attack. He is captured, sold into slavery, ultimately becomes a gladiator, and plots revenge on those who killed his wife and friends. Boy, does that sound familiar. I ended up seeing this movie in one of those secret early screenings where they don't tell you what the movie is ahead of time, and I've seen a few of those this year, and they usually end up being these smaller indie films that I otherwise wouldn't have heard too much about. But I went into this one, and the first thing I see is the Paramount logo, and I realize, oh, this is not a tiny indie film. This is something big. And then I see Scott Free, which is Ridley Scott's production company, and I'm like, oh shit, is this Gladiator? And sure enough, the next thing I see, Gladiator II. And as soon as that popped up on the screen, the guy sitting next to me got up and left. I guess he wasn't a fan of the original? I don't think I've ever seen that happen before, where the title comes up and someone just walks right out. That was so bizarre. But anyway, I have not watched Gladiator recently. I do remember liking it at the time. It was, of course, wildly successful, made all the money, won all of the awards, was very big on spectacle, not so big on historical accuracy. And I enjoyed it very much, and indeed most people did, except for that one guy that was sitting next to me, I guess. I don't know. As for Gladiator II, it was perfectly fine for what it was, although I did not like it nearly as much as its predecessor. And I think the biggest problem I had is the story was just way too similar to the first movie. In the first movie, Maximus is betrayed by Rome, becomes a slave and then a gladiator, wins the support of the crowd, and plots to overthrow the emperor with the support of a Roman regiment waiting outside the city. In Gladiator II, Lucius is betrayed by Rome, becomes a slave, then a gladiator, wins the support of the crowd, and plots to overthrow the emperor with a Roman regiment waiting outside the city. What the hell? To be clear, Gladiator II does a few things differently from its predecessor, but the plots don't really start to deviate until we get into the third act. And up until that point, I'm sitting in the theater wondering why they bothered to make a new movie if they're just going to tell the same story. Like, what are we doing here? Another big problem, and this is not so much a problem with the movie as it is the marketing department, but the trailers already gave away the big twist that Hanno/Lucius is actually the son of Maximus. I believe that was initially a fan theory, and Gladiator II confirms it. And because they gave that away in the trailer, the scene where Lucilla reveals to Lucius the true identity of his father kind of fell flat because I already knew it going in. I really wish the studios would let the big reveal actually be a big reveal instead of giving it away beforehand. Like, imagine if the trailer for Empire Strikes Back actually had Vader saying, "I am your father." That would have been so stupid. This is no better. And you know, the more I think about it, the more I wonder if it was really all that necessary to make Lucius the son of Maximus. Having him just be this man known as Hanno and then later revealing him to be Lucius, the long-lost heir to the throne, probably would have been enough on its own. Adding in the fact that he is the son of Maximus seems like putting a hat on a hat. He already had something to fight for, his motivations were clear. I don't know if making him Maximus' son added all that much. I'm also disappointed that Jimon Hansu was not able to come back as Juba. Supposedly, that was originally the plan, but I guess there was a scheduling conflict and he just wasn't able to make it work. In fact, Lucius has a Numidian mentor early on in the movie, and I would not be surprised if that character was originally supposed to be Juba. They did bring back Derek Jacobi as Senator Gracchus, although I'm not really sure why, because he didn't have a whole hell of a lot to do. He was just kinda there. On the plus side, this movie looks fantastic from minute one. We know from the first movie that Scott knows how to do spectacle, and this is no different. One of the very first things we see is this big epic battle between Rome and Numidia, and it is intense and violent and very well executed. You got these huge armies just beating the hell out of each other, and these catapults and trebuchets launching these massive flaming balls of death. It's great. The gladiatorial fights are also very well done and highly entertaining, albeit a little bit silly. You may have seen this in the trailer, but early on in the movie, Hanno has to fight some baboons in one of these gladiator matches, although they look like some weird, freaky, mutant vampire baboons. I don't know what the hell they were putting in the Roman water to make the baboons look like that. They also stage a naval battle in the Colosseum, which I believe is called a naumachia or something like that, and that is actually a thing that Romans did back in the day. Although I don't think a real naumachia involved live sharks. And I'm not making that up. They have actual sharks with frickin' laser beams. No, not with frickin' laser beams, but they were sharks in the water during this big naval battle in the Colosseum. Like, what? I mean, I know there are sharks in the Mediterranean. There probably were back then as well. But how the hell did they get the shark into the Colosseum? What are we doing here? My God, I'm pretty sure Ridley Scott has gone quite mad in his old age, and frankly, I am here for it. I did find it interesting that the movie took time to point out the statue of Romulus and Remus as they entered Rome, making this the second movie Ridley Scott has worked on this year that mentions Romulus and Remus. I am sensing a pattern here. The cast did a pretty good job overall, though I'm not sure all of them realized how silly of a movie they were in. I will say Denzel Washington certainly understood the assignment. He plays a character named Macrinus, and he is a treat to watch in this movie. He is the slaver that acquires Hanno and several others after the fall of Numidia, and he is what I would call dangerously ambitious. He uses his wits to charm and backstab his way up the ranks of Roman society, and he does it very quickly. He's very good at what he does. Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger play brothers and co-emperors Geta and Caracalla. And it becomes abundantly clear from the moment these two show up on camera that neither of them are quite right in the head. Caracalla's mind is starting to go due to a nasty case of syphilis, and Geta, I don't know what his excuse is. He's just an asshole. Scott said in an interview that he actually took some inspiration for these two from Beavis and Butthead, and honestly, I can kind of see it. They are a lot of fun to watch, but also scary at the same time because you never know quite how they're going to react to the situation. And at times, I don't know if they do either. I already mentioned Nielsen came back as Lucilla, and apparently between movies, she ends up marrying Pedro Pascal. Lucky her. Pascal plays Roman General Marcus Acacius, who is an interesting character. He's very good at his job, but also kinda hates it. This is a man who has clearly seen entirely too much of war, and while he is perfectly willing to do what his empire asks of him, he would very much like to retire and just go away. I don't think I've seen much of Paul Mescal before, who plays Hanno/Lucius. Nothing really remarkable about his performance, but he was fine, and also built like a tank. I'm not even sure why he needs the armor. If you tried to stab him with a sword, I think it would just bounce off. I did like the friendship between him and Ravi, who is played by Alexander Karim. He is a former gladiator himself, who has since become a doctor that stitches up the gladiators after their fights. Lucky for Hanno, he's good at it. And I thought those two played off each other very well. Some of Mescal's best scenes were when he was sharing the screen with Ravi. And while this movie, like its predecessor, is not very big on historical accuracy, some of the characters are based on people who actually lived. Geta and Caracalla were actually brothers who served as co-emperor. Briefly, it did not last very long because they hated each other and could not share the throne, and in fact one ended up killing the other. And while I don't know if he actually owned any gladiators, there was a man named Macrinus who rose to power as emperor after Geta and Caracalla. You can see where Scott took inspiration, even if he is playing fast and loose with the details. And to be clear, I don't really have a problem with that. I understand it's not a documentary. Like I said, it is not as good as its predecessor, but it has a solid cast, great visuals, and plenty of action. I certainly don't expect this to win Best Picture, though I don't expect it to win Worst Picture either, and in the end, I had fun. And if you were a fan of the original, I think this is at least worth a matinee. And that's all I have to say about Gladiator II. Till next time, take care.